The storm swallowed Miller's Creek whole. White walls of snow erased houses, fences, and even the sound of church bells. Families huddled in darkened rooms as wind screamed through every crack. But through that frozen howl, a soldier heard something else, a whisper. Faint. Fragile. Human. Daniel tightened his scarf, looked at his K9, and gave the only order that mattered in the world: find her. The storm came without mercy. By dusk, Miller's Creek had already vanished under a wall of white. The roads, the fences, even the church steeple that usually pointed like a steady finger to heaven, gone. Snowflakes swirled so thick they looked less like weather and more like an invading army. Every gust howled as if the sky itself had teeth. Daniel stood at the edge of what had once been Main Street, his parka coated in ice, his scarf stiff with frost. Shadow pressed against his leg, the German shepherd's fur already whitened at the tips. The dog's ears flicked, but his body was steady, braced against the gale as if the wind were nothing more than another battlefield hazard. Daniel squinted into the storm. He had seen war zones drowned in dust storms, deserts where heat shimmered like a mirage, and forests where rain turned the ground to quicksand. But this was different. Snow didn't just cover, it consumed. He pulled his radio closer, breath fogging in the frigid air. Command, this is Daniel. Visibility 0. Confirming report, missing child, age 7. Last seen near the river bend before the storm swallowed her path. Static hissed back, broken by a clipped voice. Confirmed. Family evacuated, but girl unaccounted for. Too dangerous for vehicles. You're closest. Proceed at your discretion. Copy. Daniel clicked the radio off. At your discretion. The phrase meant the same thing it had overseas: if you fail, no one else is coming. He looked down at Shadow. The shepherd blinked snow from his lashes, tail stiff but ready. Daniel crouched, pressing his forehead briefly to the dog's. His lips cracked as he whispered, "Find her, boy. Bring her home." Shadow gave a single bark, short, sharp, certain. Then he lowered his head and pressed his nose into the snow, already catching the faintest thread of scent. Daniel followed as the dog began to move, every step a battle. Snow was up to his knees in places, drifts sculpted into cruel ridges by the wind. His boots sank, sucked up by icy depths, but he pushed forward, eyes locked on Shadow's glowing harness light. Minutes stretched. The storm battered them from every side, twisting directions until even Daniel's compass seemed to waver. But Shadow never faltered. His head dipped, nostrils flaring, tracking something no human could sense. Then, faint. Daniel froze. He had almost missed it, buried beneath the roar of wind. A sound not made by the storm. A small, fragile thread of voice, carried on the gale. Help! His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned sharply, scanning the white void. Emily, he shouted, voice tearing raw through the storm. Nothing. Only the scream of the blizzard. Then again, softer, like a prayer, help! Daniel gritted his teeth. He glanced at Shadow. The dog had already changed direction, veering left, his pace urgent now, nose dragging a path in the snow. They trudged deeper into the storm, guided only by that faint whisper in Shadow's unerring drive. Snow crusted Daniel's lashes, turning the world into a blur. His thighs burned from wading through drifts. Still, he pressed on. Emily, he shouted again. Call out for me. Keep talking. A pause. Then, cold. Daniel's breath caught. She was alive, but the cold would kill faster than any collapsing building. Hypothermia didn't wait for courage. It smothered silently, turning whispers into silence. Shadow, faster, he urged. The shepherd bounded forward, paws plunging into the white, ears pinned against the gale. His tail cut a determined line through the storm. They reached the edge of the river bend, or what Daniel thought was the river bend. The ice sheet stretched before them, indistinguishable from the land around it, except for the hollow echo of wind across its frozen skin. Shadow stopped, sniffing hard, circling. His claws scraped against ice, skittering. Then he barked once, nose pointing at a drift piled against the riverbank. Daniel lunged forward, falling to his knees, shoving gloved hands into the snow. He dug furiously, ice burning through the fabric, breath tearing in ragged gasps. Shadow joined him, paws flinging powder in frantic bursts. The drift gave way, revealing a splash of color. A mitten, pink, dusted with frost. Small fingers trembled inside it. Daniel's chest clenched. He tore away more snow, uncovering a small face pale against the storm, lips blue, eyes half closed. Emily. She stirred faintly, breath shallow, and whispered, "Cold." Daniel pulled her into his arms, wrapping his body around hers, shielding her from the wind. "I've got you. You're safe now." His voice broke despite himself. Shadow pressed close, curling his warm body against Emily's side, covering her with fur and heat. His steady panting became a rhythm, as if urging her to breathe with him. Daniel adjusted his scarf, tucking it around her tiny face. "Stay awake, Emily. Listen to Shadow. Feel how warm he is. We're not stopping until we get you home." The storm screamed its challenge, shaking the trees, blasting them with icy fists. But Daniel no longer heard it the same way. Somewhere in that frozen howl was still a whisper, and now, it had found an answer. The wind wanted to take everything. It clawed at Daniel's parka, ripped at his scarf, and tried to peel Emily out of his arms like a cruel hand. He hunched tighter, cocooning her with his chest and shoulders, shielding her face from the bite of the gale. Shadow pressed into the other side, a living wall of heat, his body curved protectively along the child's small frame. Frost webbed the shepherd's whiskers, his breath steamed in steady bursts, rhythmic and reassuring. "Emily," Daniel said, mouth close to her ear so his words didn't blow away, "you have one job. Stay awake. Count with me. 1, 2. Her lips moved sluggishly beneath the scarf he'd tucked around her chin. 3. "Good," he said. "Shadow's keeping score too." Shadow answered with a soft, deliberate waft, as if to say, 4. Daniel's eyes swept the whiteout, searching for landmarks that no longer existed. The river bend lay to his right, a flat sheet of treacherous sameness. The town was somewhere east, where the power lines used to hum. Now the poles were ghosts, their crossbars lost in the storm. Every direction looked like a blank page. He forced himself to think like a map, even when the map had been eaten by snow. "Winds from the north," he muttered. He turned his face, let the gale sting his cheek, then angled his shoulders. "We ride it at our back, use it, don't fight it." He shifted Emily higher against his chest, feeling the alarming lightness of her. Hypothermia steals weight, it takes heat, then strength, then will. He'd seen it before, in mountains, in high deserts when night came fast, in winter ranges where men tried to make jokes with lips they could no longer feel. The cure was the same everywhere: warmth, shelter, time. The blizzard refused to give them any of the three. "Shadow," he said, tapping the dog's harness. "Trail. Home." The shepherd lowered his head and began to move, slow, methodical, carving a path with his chest through the drift. He didn't sprint. Sprinting wastes heat. Instead, he plowed, choosing the packed edges where the wind had scoured the snow lower. He checked the air every few steps, testing currents for a pocket of wood smoke, for the sour tang of diesel, for anything that smelled like people. The world narrowed to the three of them and a tunnel of snow that existed only as long as they were inside it. The storm filled the space behind them as soon as they passed, erasing their footprints with a ruthless efficiency that made Daniel's stomach tighten. There would be no turning back. "Count for me, Em," Daniel said, though his own teeth had started to chatter. 1, 2. Her voice came thin but present. F5. Close enough, he said, forcing a grin she couldn't see. Shadow says 6. The dog's tail thumped once against Daniel's leg, confirmation. A gust hammered them sideways. Daniel planted a knee, turning so his back took the brunt. Snow clawed over them, trying to bury them standing. He waited, counting his breaths, then pushed up and moved again. Keep moving. That was the whole plan. Stop and you become part of the landscape. They crested a drift and slid down the far side, stumbling into a shallow, windswept trough. For a moment, the gale eased, the world settling into a sibilant hiss. In the lull, Daniel heard it, a faint metallic creak, off to the east. A sign? A gate? He angled that way and Shadow adjusted without a word, reading the tilt of Daniel's body as easily as the scent of the child. Cold, Emily whispered. The word was almost apologetic, as if she were admitting a mistake. I know, Daniel said. He stopped long enough to strip off his own inner fleece, jamming it between his parka and Emily's soaked outer layer. Cold bit his exposed wrists, he ignored it. He pulled a heat pack from his pocket, cracked it, and slid it gently into the crook of her neck where blood could carry the warmth fastest. Better? A pause. Warm spot. Good. Hold on to it like a secret. He tucked his chin, took the stretcher straps he'd lashed earlier, and looped one under Emily's knees to keep her curled against him, to preserve what heat she had left. The movement cost him, he felt the drag in his shoulders, the burn in his thighs. He welcomed the pain. Pain meant blood was still moving. Shadow halted, lifted his head, and sniffed. A moment later, he churned forward with new purpose, veering slightly south. Daniel followed, and almost slammed into a fence half buried in snow. The metallic creak came again, a loose chain on a farm gate, rattling in the wind. Good boy, Daniel breathed. The gate meant a property line. Property lines meant structures. Structures meant roof. The fence ran east-west. Shadow turned east, hugging it, using the posts as breadcrumbs. Daniel let his gloved fingers brush each one as they passed, counting them like rosary beads. 3 posts. 5. 7. A shape loomed out of the white, angular, darker than the storm, a barn, its roof hunched under a heavy burden of snow, its side door hanging crooked. Shelter, Daniel said. The word tasted like reprieve. The door was drifted high. Daniel handed Emily to gravity and wool, easing down, never letting her touch the snow, then kicked at the drift with his heel, carving a step. Shadow threw his shoulder into the powder, helping, flinging snow with his chest. The door groaned but didn't budge. Daniel set his shoulder and shoved. Wood shrieked. Ice cracked. The door jumped an inch, then another, then swung inward with a rush of snow that spilled over their boots. Inside was blue darkness, quiet as a prayer. The wind's scream became a muffled moan. Daniel stumbled in, dragging the door shut with his foot in a grunt, then shouldered a fallen bale aside with a violence born of hope. They had a room. Not warm yet, not safe yet, but a room between them and the infinite. Shadow, guard, he said out of habit. The shepherd took 2 steps into the gloom, swept it with nose and eyes, then circled back, satisfied. Empty. Daniel lowered Emily onto a pile of dry straw that had been sheltered from the roof leak by the overhang. He stripped off her wet mittens, replaced them with his spare liners, then layered his damp fleece tighter around her. He tugged a tattered horse blanket down from a hook and shook it hard, sending out motes that glittered in the dim. Eyes on me, he said gently, lifting her chin. Count. Her eyes found his, dull but not gone. 7. Sharp as a tack, he said, and meant it. Shadow curled along her other side, pressing close until Daniel could feel heat blooming between dog and child like a small fire. The shepherd lifted his head and set his gaze on the door as if daring the storm to try again. Daniel moved through the barn by memory. He'd grown up in places like this, where every winter found you whether you wanted it or not. He found an overturned bucket, a cracked trough, a metal toolbox half frozen to the floor. In the toolbox, a flare, 2 matches in a waxed envelope, and a coil of baling wire. He almost laughed. He would have traded a hot meal for half of that 10 minutes ago. He built a pocket fire. Not a blaze, too risky in dry hay and stray oil, but a careful cradle of kindling in a galvanized tub, tucked behind a low masonry wall where an old milking stall had been. He struck the match with his teeth gritted, once, twice, then cupped it until the flame caught the shredded twine and tiny splinters. Fire answered like a friend you hadn't seen in years. Warmth crept back in shy inches. Emily's shoulders shook as sensation returned, and she whimpered, not from fear this time but from nerves waking up. Daniel wrapped his hands around hers and rubbed gently, pushing blood back into stubborn fingers. "Hurts," she whispered. "That's you coming back," he said. "That's good. That's living." He pulled out his radio and keyed it. "Command, this is Daniel. I have the child, female, 7, hypothermic but responsive. Shelter secured in a barn east of the river bend, past the old gate line. Visibility nil. Requesting guidance to nearest medevac point or sled team." Static. Then a splintered reply, "Copy, wind, bridges out, stay put if sheltered, flare on the hour. Teams triangulating." "Understood," Daniel said, and looked at Shadow. "We hold." The shepherd blinked slow. Holding was a job, and Shadow was good at jobs. "Emily," Daniel said softly. "You made it to halftime. Next is the second half. You know what we do at halftime? Snack?" He smiled despite himself. "Exactly." He tore a ration bar into minuscule pieces, warmed them above the tub's edge, and let her take them one at a time, chasing each with tiny sips of lukewarm water. "Shadow gets a bonus for navigation." He palmed the dog a chunk. Shadow chewed once, eyes never leaving the door. Outside, the storm hurled itself at the barn and lost. The wood complained but held. When the hour mark came, he counted by breath and gut, a soldier's clock. Daniel cracked the flare and stepped to the lee side window, pried aboard just enough to punch the red spear of light into the night. The blizzard grabbed the glow and swallowed it whole. Still, light travels farther than hope sometimes. He held it steady until the flare went to ember. He returned to the straw, to the tub fire, to the breathing of a child and a dog moving back into the world inch by inch. "Daniel?" Emily said after a long while, voice thicker now, more present. "Yeah?" Did the blizzard take everything?" He looked at Shadow, at the embering coil of fire, at the tiny fortress they had made between 4 stubborn walls and 1,000 miles of snow. "Not everything," he said. "It didn't take your whisper. And that's how we found you." Shadow's tail brushed the straw, slow, certain. And in the barn's blue dark, with the storm raging its useless war outside, 3 heartbeats kept time like a promise that morning would still exist. The blizzard refused to quit. Even inside the barn, its voice thundered through every crack in the boards, a deep-throated howl that made the walls shudder. Each gust rattled the loose chains, groaned across the roof, and shook loose powder down through the rafters. Daniel knew the structure wouldn't last forever. Barns were never built to fight off storms this wild. Emily stirred weakly under the horse blanket, her eyes flickering. She'd eaten scraps of ration bar, sipped water, and taken a little warmth back into her cheeks, but the danger wasn't over. Hypothermia was a thief, it liked to come back for more. Shadow lay pressed against her, his body curled tight, eyes fixed on the barn door. His ears twitched at every thud of snow, every distant crack. He was half guard, half furnace, keeping her alive without even knowing it. Daniel knelt by the galvanized tub where the small fire smoldered. He fed it slowly, slivers of wood shaved from a broken shelf, straw twisted into tight knots. He wanted more flame, more heat, but too much would risk smoke choking them or sparks catching dry hay. Balance was survival. He checked his watch. The flare he'd lit an hour ago was gone to ash. Outside, the storm had swallowed it whole. Had anyone even seen it? Were search teams even able to move in weather like this? The radio sat silent at his hip. He keyed it again. Command, this is Daniel. Barn shelter secured east of River Bend. Child alive, hypothermic but stable. Requesting update. Static. Then a fragment, teams grounded, wind speed, triangulating, the rest dissolved. Daniel exhaled through his teeth. Grounded. That meant no sleds, no snowmobiles, no chopper. For now, they were on their own. He crouched beside Emily, gently adjusting the blanket. How are we doing, Em? Her lips trembled. Tired. I know. But tired is good. Tired means your body's fighting. Shadow won't let you sleep too much. He'll nudge you if you try. Shadow wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate, as though confirming the deal. Emily gave a faint smile, then shivered and tucked closer to the dog. Daniel's gaze shifted to the boarded window. Snow leaked in faint threads of white light, swirling in restless spirals. They couldn't just sit forever. If the barn went down, they'd be buried before they could move. He needed contact. Proof someone was still out there. He searched the barn again. Behind a broken feed bin, he found a rusted ladder, half buried in hay. He dragged it out, testing its rungs. Old, but strong enough. His eyes lifted to the loft window, half covered in ice, but higher, exposed. If he could fire a flare from there, maybe it would clear the barn roof and actually pierce the storm. Daniel looked back at Emily. She had drifted into a half-sleep, lips parted, but her hands still clutched Shadow's harness strap. The dog hadn't moved, not even blinked. He knew the meaning of guard duty. Shadow, Daniel said softly. The shepherd turned his head. Watch her. Shadow laid his chin on Emily's chest, eyes never leaving Daniel, then returned his gaze to the door. The message was clear, I've got her. Daniel climbed. Each rung creaked, groaned, but held. The loft window was iced over, its glass cracked. He braced himself and shoved with his shoulder until it snapped outward, shards scattering into the storm. Instantly the gale punched through, biting his face raw. He pulled the flare from his pocket, snapped it, and held it high. Red fire bloomed, casting his face in bloody glow. He leaned out, shielding it from the wind as best he could, then shoved it skyward. The flare screamed into the storm. For a second, he thought it would vanish immediately. But then, it burst. A red blossom of light flared above the white, casting eerie shadows across the snowdrifts. For a moment, Miller's Creek had a second sun. He prayed someone, somewhere, saw it. The wind howled louder, as if furious at the intrusion. The flare hissed, sputtered, then burned itself to a glowing ember before falling into the drifts. The sky returned to white, indifferent. Daniel shut the window, climbed down, and dropped to the straw floor. Emily stirred at the sound, her eyes opening faintly. Light, she whispered. Yes, Daniel said, kneeling beside her. A signal. It tells people where we are. She blinked slowly. They'll come? He hesitated. He remembered too many times in foreign deserts, waiting for backup that never arrived. But here, in Miller's Creek, with a child's whisper at stake, he wouldn't let doubt poison hope. They'll come, he said firmly. Shadow wagged his tail once again, sealing the promise. But promises didn't stop the storm. The barn walls rattled harder. Snow pushed against the door, creeping in at the bottom seam. Daniel felt the structure groan like a tired old man. "We hold here until first light," he muttered. "Then if they don't come, we move." Emily's eyes fluttered. "Move where?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't know. For now, all they had was the fire, a dog's warmth, and a whisper in the storm that refused to be silenced. The barn had given them a pocket of safety, but it was a fragile gift, one the storm was already trying to reclaim. By midnight, the wind had sharpened into knives. Each gust slammed into the barn's walls with such force that the old boards flexed like ribs under a blow. Snow piled high against the doors, burying them inch by inch. Somewhere above, the roof let out a long, aching groan that made Daniel's stomach twist. He knew that sound. He'd heard it in buildings hit by artillery overseas, the sound of weight deciding whether to hold or surrender. Shadow's ears pricked at the noise. He rose from Emily's side, body rigid, head tilted upward. A low growl built in his chest, not a bark, not panic, but a warning, something's wrong. Daniel rose to his feet, every joint stiff from cold. He adjusted the fire, then swept his flashlight across the rafters. Snow had forced its way through cracks in the roof, powder sifting down in silver shafts. But worse than that were the beams, old wood, bowed under the crushing load. Ice clung to the nails like teeth. He muttered under his breath, "She won't last." Emily stirred. Her eyes fluttered, half dreaming, half aware. "It's loud." Daniel crouched beside her quickly. "That's just the storm talking. Nothing to worry about." He tucked the blanket tighter, glancing at Shadow, whose tail gave one slow wag, an unspoken agreement to back the lie. But Daniel wasn't lying to himself. The barn was a temporary haven, not a fortress. If the roof gave way, their small fire would be smothered, their heat gone, their shelter buried. He rose and forced himself to think like a soldier again. "Options," he whispered. "Stay and risk collapse. Or move, blind, into a storm that'll cut us in half." Neither option was survival, not alone. Shadow padded to the door, sniffed the crack where snow pressed through, then glanced back at Daniel, tail stiff. He wanted to scout, to test the air. "Not yet, boy," Daniel said firmly. "We move only when we have to." The roof groaned again, louder this time, a shudder that rained splinters into the straw. Emily whimpered, clutching Shadow's harness as if the dog could hold the building up by will alone. Daniel swept the loft again with his flashlight. One beam in particular sagged dangerously, its ends split where nails strained against ice. He cursed under his breath. If it gave way, the entire section above the child would collapse. He couldn't risk that. He grabbed the baling wire he'd found earlier, looped it around a support post, and braced it across the beam like a crude splint. It wasn't strong enough to stop collapse, but it might slow it. Every second mattered. Shadow watched him work, head cocked, tail flicking once in approval. When Daniel finished, he dropped back to Emily. She was trembling, her breath shallow. He peeled off his gloves, rubbed her hands briskly, and pressed another cracked heat pack against her chest. "Stay with me, Em. You're tougher than this storm." She whispered something, so faint he had to lean close to hear it. "Is Shadow cold?" Daniel blinked. Of all the questions, that was the one. He glanced at the shepherd. Shadow was still pressed tight against her side, his body radiating warmth, eyes steady. "No," Daniel said softly. "He's warm. He's the warmest thing in this storm." Emily sighed and tucked closer into the dog's fur. Shadow licked her temple once, slow and deliberate, as though answering the question himself. The storm struck again, this time with such force that the entire barn shuddered. The roof groaned, then cracked. A shower of snow spilled down, dousing half their fire. Daniel cursed, shielding the embers with his body, coaxing the flames back to life with precious scraps of wood. Smoke stung his eyes. When the fire finally caught again, the roof gave another long moan, louder, more insistent. Emily's eyes flew open. "Daniel?" He forced calm into his voice. "Still here." She clutched Shadow tighter. "It's scary." "I know," Daniel said. He looked at the sagging rafters, at the splintering nails, at the snow still pushing its weight down on them. Then he looked at Shadow, who stared back with the same answer he always gave: decide. Daniel inhaled through his nose, steady, soldier steady. "Then we're not waiting for it to fall. We move." Emily's eyes widened. "In the storm?" "Yes," he said. "But this time, we'll move together. You, me, and Shadow." Shadow barked once, short, sharp, resolute. Daniel wrapped Emily tighter in the horse blanket, then bound her against his chest with the stretcher straps. He adjusted her position so her face was shielded from the wind, then clipped Shadow's rope to his harness. The shepherd lowered his head, muscles coiling, already braced for the fight ahead. Daniel took one last look at the fire, at the faint glow that had kept them alive. Then he kicked snow over it, smothering the embers. No sense leaving smoke to choke them if the barn collapsed behind. The roof groaned again, angrier, splitting like a giant sigh. Daniel pulled the door open against the weight of snow, the storm roaring back into their faces with renewed fury. He looked at Shadow, gave the only command that mattered. "Trail. Home." And together, with the storm waiting to devour them, they stepped out into the blizzard once more. The world outside the barn was worse than Daniel remembered. The storm hit them like a wall of claws, snow stung his cheeks, wind ripped at his hood, and visibility shrank to the length of Shadow's rope. The German shepherd lowered his head and plowed forward, his chest breaking through drifts, paws punching into powder that wanted to swallow him whole. Daniel carried Emily tight against him, the straps keeping her bound to his chest. Her small breaths ghosted against his collarbone, each one thin but present. He murmured constantly, not words to be understood, just sound to keep her tethered to this side of the world. Shadow barked once, a clipped signal, then turned sharply left. Daniel followed without hesitation. "Trust the dog. Always trust the dog." Snow crunched differently underfoot here, packed, scoured by wind. Daniel recognized the pattern. It was a service road, one that ran toward the Miller farmstead. If the storm hadn't buried the place, there might still be a roof, maybe even people. Minutes stretched like hours. The storm was a bully that never tired, pushing, pulling, trying to tear them apart. Daniel's thighs burned from trudging. His hands ached from holding Emily so tight. He refused to think about stopping. Stopping was dying. Then, through the white void, something flickered. Daniel froze. Shadow stopped too, nose high, ears forward. There it was again. A faint glow, trembling against the storm. Not natural. Not lightning. A lantern. Hope flared, and suspicion with it. Blizzards were tricksters. Light bent, sound warped. What looked close could be miles. What looked safe could be a false beacon, or worse, an abandoned outbuilding ready to collapse. "Easy," Daniel murmured. He crouched lower, shielding Emily from the wind. "Shadow, check." The shepherd bounded ahead, rope dragging taut. His silhouette vanished in the storm, only the faint glow of his harness light marking his path. Daniel strained, heart hammering, until Shadow reappeared, barking twice, his clear but urgent call. Daniel pressed forward, teeth gritted against the gale. The glow grew stronger, steadier, resolving into a swinging lantern nailed above a half-buried doorway. Snow piled high against the frame, but the light burned stubbornly. Shadow circled back, barking once more, then pawed at the drift near the door. Daniel reached it, kicked at the snow, then shoved with his shoulder until the warped wood groaned open. Warm air didn't rush out, only cold, but it was shelter. That was enough. Inside was a narrow cellar, the stone walls damp, the air stale. Old farm tools leaned rusted in corners. It wasn't much, but the walls cut the wind, and the lantern light was real. Daniel set Emily down gently on a crate, her blanket still tight around her. He rubbed her arms briskly, then pressed another heat pack against her ribs. Her eyes fluttered open, dull but aware. "Where are we?" she whispered. "Shelter," Daniel said firmly. "Better than the storm." Shadow paced the cellar once, nose twitching, then sat by the door, watching. His fur was rimed with ice, but his eyes were alive, alert. Daniel lit another small fire in an old iron bucket, feeding it slivers of broken wood from the shelves. The flame caught, flickered, then steadied. The cellar glowed orange, shadows dancing against stone. For the first time since leaving the barn, warmth touched their faces. Emily leaned into it, sighing. "It's pretty." Daniel crouched beside her. "It's survival." But even as he said it, his mind worked. The lantern had been lit recently, too recently. No farmer left flame burning in an abandoned storm cellar. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. His hand went to the radio. Static. The storm still ate every signal. He scanned the walls again, his soldier's eye catching details others might miss: a tin cup still damp, boot prints half buried by blown snow near the entrance, a blanket folded in the corner. Someone had left in a hurry. Shadow growled softly, ears turning toward the far side of the cellar. Not a warning bark, just awareness. Daniel froze, listening. At first there was only the storm's muffled roar. Then, faint, beneath it, footsteps. He rose slowly, his body between Emily and the sound. Shadow's hackles lifted, a low rumble in his throat. The footsteps stopped just beyond the door. Silence. Daniel's heart pounded. In war zones, silence before entry usually meant decision, friend or foe. He crouched, whispered to Shadow, "Guard." Quiet. The shepherd lowered, body taut, ready. Then, a knock. 3 slow raps against the wood. Emily stirred, whispering weakly, "Who's that?" Daniel's hand hovered over his knife. His eyes never left the door. "We're about to find out." The lantern swung, its light trembling across their faces. The storm howled outside, waiting. And Miller's Creek held its breath again. The knock echoed through the cellar like it didn't belong to it at all but to the storm itself, demanding to be let in. Daniel stayed crouched, one hand on his knife, the other braced on the crate where Emily lay bundled. His heartbeat slowed into the rhythm he'd learned overseas: count, breathe, decide. Shadow was already a statue of tension, eyes locked on the door, chest rising in slow, heavy breaths. Another knock. Louder this time. "Who's there?" Daniel called, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the wind. For a moment, only silence. Then, a man's voice, cracked by cold. "Open, please." Emily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Is it rescue?" she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rescue teams carried radios, not lanterns. Rescue teams called out names, not single words. Still, the storm didn't forgive suspicion. A life could hang behind that door. He signaled Shadow with 2 fingers. "Ready." The shepherd shifted, muscles coiling, but stayed silent. Daniel stepped toward the door, knife low, body angled. "I'm opening," he called. "Slow." He pulled the latch. The door creaked inward, spilling a wave of snow across the floor. A figure stumbled inside, collapsing to hands and knees, dragging the stone with him. He was a farmer, middle-aged, face raw from windburn, beard rimed with ice. His coat was patched, his gloves torn, his eyes bloodshot. He looked more ghost than man. Daniel kicked the door shut with his heel and shoved it against the drift until the latch caught again. The wind dulled to a muffled howl. The man sagged against the wall, gasping. Thank God, thought I'd freeze out there. Shadow stayed in front of Emily, hackles still bristling, a growl humming in his throat. Daniel didn't lower his guard. Name? The man coughed hard, pulling his scarf down. Earl. Earl Tanner. Farm's half a mile north. Roof collapsed. I lit the lantern, went looking for help. Saw your flare. His eyes flicked to Emily, then softened. You found her. Emily blinked at him, too tired to speak. Daniel studied him carefully. Earl's story fit, the lantern, the blanket in the corner, the damp tin cup. Still, storms made men desperate. Desperation could turn anyone dangerous. He nodded once, but didn't sheath his knife. You're lucky the dog didn't meet you first. Earl gave a broken laugh that turned into another cough. Would have deserved it. Blizzard's taken everything. Animals, gone. Wife's at the shelter, I hope. Haven't seen her since morning. His eyes glazed briefly, then snapped back. But the girl, she needs out. She won't last if we wait. Daniel crouched back by Emily, checking her pulse, rubbing warmth into her hands. Command says evac teams are grounded. First light's our window. Earl shook his head violently. First light? This barn, this cellar, they won't hold. Snow's piling higher every hour. You stay, you bury. The roof above groaned in grim agreement, as if to prove him right. Emily whispered, cold, and shifted closer to Shadow's fur. The shepherd licked her cheek once, then stared hard at Daniel, eyes bright, tail stiff. Daniel's mind raced. He didn't like moving blind in this storm. But he liked waiting under a groaning roof even less. Earl's presence complicated things, but also offered something else, knowledge of the land. You know the way? Daniel asked. Earl nodded quickly. Shelter's west. Roads are gone, but there's a line of windbreak trees. Follow them, you hit the church. The basement's packed with families. They've got stoves running, food, medics. I barely made it out, almost didn't, but I can guide you back. Shadow growled low, not convinced. His body shifted subtly between Emily and the farmer. Daniel rubbed the shepherd's back, steadying him. We move only if Shadow leads, he said firmly. Earl's eyes flicked to the dog. Fine by me. Just don't wait too long. Blizzard doesn't forgive hesitation. The storm slammed the roof again, rattling dust from the rafters. Snow hissed in through cracks, swirling like ghosts. Daniel looked at Emily, her eyelids drooping, her lips still too pale. He thought about the flare swallowed by the storm, about the silence on the radio, about the barn they'd already abandoned. He hated it, but Earl was right. Waiting was death. Pack up, Daniel said. He kicked snow over the bucket fire, smothering the glow. The cellar fell back to lantern light. He hoisted Emily against his chest, rewrapped the blanket tighter, and checked the straps. Shadow pressed close, rope clipped, eyes fierce. Earl adjusted his torn gloves, pulling them tight. Stay close. Don't lose the line of my back. Daniel's hand lingered on Shadow's harness. No, he said quietly. We follow the dog. He doesn't lose trails. Earl gave a humorless smile. Then may God guide his nose. Daniel cracked the door. The storm shrieked in, furious. Snow blasted his face, clawed at his parka, tried to tear Emily from his arms. Shadow lunged forward into the white, rope taut, leading the way. Behind him, Earl stumbled into step. And once again, they stepped into the blizzard, 3 souls and a dog, chasing survival through a world that wanted to erase them. The blizzard didn't just push them, it hunted them. Every gust came like a giant hand, shoving, twisting, trying to scatter them across the fields. Snow burned Daniel's face, freezing his lashes until each blink felt like shattering glass. Emily was a fragile weight bound to his chest, her small breaths shallow against his collar. He whispered to her constantly, the sound of his voice as much for himself as for her. "Still with me, Em? One more step. Shadows leading. We're together." The shepherd plowed ahead, tail stiff, harness light cutting a faint cone into the white. His paws churned through drifts, never wavering. He'd chosen a heading and would not break from it. Behind them, Earl stumbled, hunched against the gale, his lantern swinging wildly. Several times he cursed under his breath, words ripped away by the wind. He lagged, then surged, always just close enough to keep them in sight. "Trees," he shouted once, voice ragged. "We hit the line of trees, we'll find the church." Daniel's ears barely caught the words. He glanced left and right. Nothing but white, endless and shifting. The world was a blank sheet with no edges. Only shadow moved like he could read it. Minutes bled into each other. Daniel's legs burned, his shoulders ached from carrying Emily, but stopping was not an option. The storm punished hesitation. He'd seen too many soldiers freeze in indecision, literally freeze. Then, dark shapes emerged. At first they looked like shadows in the snow, tricks of vision. But slowly, the white peeled back enough to reveal them, trees. Tall, black spines of pine, leaning under the storm, but still standing. A ragged line, stretching west. Shadow barked once, sharp and certain. Daniel exhaled. "Good boy. Trail the line." They turned, hugging the tree line, letting the pines shield them from the full teeth of the wind. The difference was immediate. The gale still howled, but the trunks broke it, turning a killing wind into a bruising shove. Emily stirred, whispering faintly, "Dark trees." "Yes," Daniel murmured. "They're our road. Just keep breathing with Shadow." Shadow brushed close to the trunks, sniffing, mapping. His tail flicked once, twice, his silent confirmation that they were still on path. But even with the trees, the storm fought back. Snow piled waist-deep in hollows, forcing Daniel to drag his legs like anchors. His breath burned in his chest. His fingers, even inside gloves, felt stiff, heavy. He ignored it. A soldier knows when cold is nipping too close, but this wasn't about him. Earl stumbled again, collapsing to his knees. His lantern smashed against a trunk, flame sputtering out. He cursed violently, pounding the snow. Daniel slowed, but only slightly. "Get up." "I can't," Earl's teeth chattered. His eyes were wild. "The storm's taken me already." "Get up." Daniel's voice cut through the gale, steel-edged. "You've survived this long. You move now or you don't move again." Earl stared at him, then at Shadow, who had paused, glancing back with impatient urgency. With a grunt, Earl shoved himself upright, leaning against the trunk. "Fine. Fine." They moved again, following the black bones of the trees. But something gnawed at Daniel. The farmer's directions had been vague. Too vague. He'd said follow the trees to the church. But pines stretched for miles. Which section led to Miller's Creek? Which line was just forest, endless and blind? Daniel tightened his grip on Emily. He couldn't afford to be wrong. Shadow's nose was their compass now. After what felt like hours but was likely minutes, the shepherd stopped. His body stiffened. He sniffed, circling a trunk, then gave two sharp barks. His found something call. Daniel trudged forward, snow dragging at his thighs. He saw it then, half-buried steps leading downward, carved into stone, almost erased by drifts. A cellar entrance. Old, but real. Earl staggered up, eyes wide. That's it. The church basement. Daniel narrowed his eyes. The steps were here, but no glow leaked from within. No sound of people. Just silence. Shadow? Daniel said softly. The shepherd sniffed again, ears flicking. His hackles rose faintly, but his tail wagged once, hesitant. The scent of people was here, faint, old. Earl pressed forward, desperate. Open it. She needs warmth, food, doctors, everything's inside. Daniel hesitated. Something felt wrong. He'd learned long ago that desperation could blind a man to details. He crouched, brushing snow from the steps, feeling the stone. Cold. Too cold. If people had been here recently, warmth would linger. Even a storm couldn't erase that in minutes. Wait, he said sharply, grabbing Earl's sleeve. If this is the church basement, where's the bell tower? Where's the cross? Earl's eyes darted, wild. Storm buried it. Daniel's gut twisted. He looked at Shadow. The dog's ears pinned back, growl vibrating low. Not panic. Warning. Emily stirred, whispering against his chest. Daniel, don't. The storm roared, rattling the trees. The cellar mouth yawned black, silent, waiting. And Daniel realized, the storm hadn't just taken everything, it was still trying to take them, in ways colder than snow. The cellar mouth gaped like a wound in the snow, its stone steps black against the blizzard's endless white. The storm howled, trying to push them forward, as if eager to see them vanish inside. Daniel didn't move. He tightened his grip on Emily, her tiny frame bound to his chest, and scanned the entrance with a soldier's eyes. Too quiet. Too clean. No footprints, no smoke curling out, no sound of voices echoing up. A basement meant to hold families should have been alive with warmth and noise. Instead, it sat in silence, like a grave dug in advance. Earl Tanner stumbled closer, face wild, beard crusted with ice. What are you waiting for? Get her inside. She'll die out here. Shadow growled, low and steady. His hackles bristled, his body angled between Emily and the cellar. He sniffed the air, then barked once, sharp, warning. Daniel's gut tightened. Shadow says no. Earl whirled on him, desperation curdling into anger. It's shelter. Don't you see? It's the church basement, I told you. This storm doesn't give second chances. Daniel's voice stayed calm, flat, controlled. Church basements don't smell like this. He tilted his head, nose to the air. Beneath the storm's bite, there was a sourness. Not death. Not rot. Something chemical. Fuel? Old oil? He couldn't place it, but Shadow's nose had picked it first. Emily stirred against his chest, whispering hoarsely, Daniel, don't go. The soldier crouched low, shielding her with his body. We won't, he said gently. Earl slammed his fist against the stone steps, snow exploding upward. You'll doom us all. That girl will freeze in your arms, and it'll be your fault. Mine too. Shadow snarled this time, a deep, guttural sound that made the storm itself seem to pause. His teeth flashed, his body tense, ready to spring if the farmer pressed closer. Daniel raised a hand, steady but unyielding. Step back, Earl. The farmer froze, chest heaving, eyes darting between the soldier and the dog. For a moment, his anger wavered into something darker, fear. He lifted his hands slowly, palms out, but his voice trembled. I was just trying to help. Daniel didn't blink. Then help me find the real shelter. This isn't it. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the storm's rage. Then Earl sagged, shoulders collapsing inward. He stumbled back a step, muttering. Maybe I was wrong. The storm, it twists everything. Daniel didn't trust the words, but he didn't press. He adjusted Emily's blanket, feeling her shiver against him, then tugged the rope attached to Shadow's harness. Trail, boy. Home. Shadow hesitated only a second before surging past the cellar mouth, leading them along the tree line again. His tail cut a determined path through the storm, away from the dark steps, away from whatever waited below. Earl followed, slower this time, muttering to himself. His voice cracked with exhaustion, regret, or madness. The blizzard had stripped him bare. Minutes dragged into eternity. The storm screamed, punishing them for leaving its trap behind. Snow lashed harder, drifts rose higher. Daniel leaned into each step, every muscle trembling with the effort of carrying both Emily and his own doubt. But Shadow never faltered. The shepherd's nose led with purpose, his body unyielding, every bark a signal, this way. Stay with me. Emily stirred again, whispering into Daniel's chest. Shadow, he knows. Daniel pressed his cheek against her frosted hair. Yes, he always knows. Behind them, Earl stumbled and cursed, nearly falling into the drifts. Daniel slowed just enough to keep him in sight. He couldn't decide yet if the farmer was ally, liability, or something else. The storm made men strange. At last, through the curtain of white, another shape emerged. Not stone steps this time, but a spire. Daniel blinked, forcing snow from his lashes. The outline sharpened, the steeple of the church, half buried, its cross still piercing the storm like a defiant spear. Shadow barked twice, urgent but triumphant. Relief surged through Daniel like fire. That's it. That's the real one. Earl staggered forward, staring at the sight. His face cracked, part joy, part disbelief. You found it. No, Daniel said quietly, his hand on Shadow's harness. He did. The shepherd surged ahead, leading them straight toward the steeple, tail high, body braced against the storm. And for the first time since the blizzard began, Daniel believed they might live to see daylight. The steeple rose out of the storm like a miracle. Half buried under drifts, its cross still reached skyward, dark and unyielding against the blizzard's fury. For Daniel, it was the first shape in hours that wasn't trying to trick his eyes. Shadow, trail, he shouted above the wind. The shepherd barked, bounding ahead, his body a streak of determination. His harness light cut through the whiteout, bouncing against the snow as he cleared a path. Daniel followed, clutching Emily tighter. Her breaths were weak, shallow, but still there. He whispered to her even when she couldn't answer, almost there, You'll hear voices. You'll feel heat. Shadow's taking us home. Earl stumbled behind them, half dragged by Will alone. His lantern was gone, his face crusted in frost. Each step looked like it might be his last, but something in the sight of the church kept pulling him forward. The closer they got, the clearer the shapes became. Buried windows. Snow-choked doors. A side entry where the drifts had piled lower. Shadow stopped there, barking furiously, paws clawing at the frame. Daniel shoved his shoulder into the door. It groaned but didn't move. Snow had sealed it tight. He dropped Emily carefully onto a drift, shielding her with his body, and set his shoulder again. Shadow leapt beside him, paws digging, claws scraping, helping. Push! Earl cried, stumbling up to throw his weight against it. The door cracked, then lurched inward, releasing a burst of frozen air. Behind it, light. Warmth. Voices. Hands reached out, grabbing Daniel, hauling him inside. Others seized Emily, rushing her toward the glow of stoves in the corner. Shadow barreled through, shaking ice from his fur, eyes scanning the room like a soldier clearing a bunker. The church basement was packed. Families huddled under blankets, faces pale but alive. Candles and lanterns burned against the cold stone walls. A wood stove blazed, casting orange glow across the room. The sudden contrast, heat, sound, light, was dizzying. "She's freezing," someone cried, as medics crowded Emily. They unwrapped her, layered warm blankets, rubbed her arms, pressed hot packs against her chest. Daniel knelt beside her, still trembling from cold, his breath ragged. "Stay with them, Em. You made it. You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered open, dull but aware. She reached weakly for Shadow. The shepherd pressed close, licking her cheek, his tail thumping the floor. "Brave dog," she whispered, voice barely audible. Then her eyes closed again, but this time in rest, not surrender. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He pressed a hand to Shadow's head. "You gave her back the breath," he whispered. "You gave her back the fight." Around them, townsfolk whispered too. Words spread quickly, the soldier, the dog, the child in the storm. Mothers clutched their children tighter, men gripped each other's shoulders. The blizzard outside still howled like an angry god, but inside the church, hope flickered again. Earl collapsed onto a bench, head in his hands, sobbing silently. He had no energy left to speak. Maybe he hadn't lied about his wife in the shelter. Maybe he had. But the storm had broken him enough that Daniel let it rest. For now. The commander of the volunteer rescue team, her uniform ragged, her face streaked with soot and frost, approached Daniel. She crouched, voice low. "You brought her in when no one else could. You carried more than one life through that storm." Daniel shook his head, eyes on Shadow. "I didn't bring her." "He did." The shepherd pressed against his leg, eyes calm now, the growl gone. His job was done, but his watch wasn't over. The commander followed his gaze, then nodded slowly. "Then we'll never forget his name." Around them, the church basement settled into a fragile calm. Fires crackled. Children dozed against their mothers. Men checked the barricades against the storm. But everyone kept stealing glances at the soldier, the child, and the dog, as if the sight itself meant survival was possible. Emily stirred again, her voice a faint thread. "Daniel." He leaned close. "I'm here." She turned her head weakly, lips brushing against Shadow's ear. "Don't let storm take me." Shadow licked her face once, slow and solemn, as if sealing an oath. Daniel whispered back, voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "It won't. Not while he breathes." The storm raged outside, furious at its loss. But inside the Church of Shadows, life had pushed back. By dawn, the blizzard was spent. It didn't end with a whisper but with exhaustion, like a beast that had raged itself to death. The howls dulled to sighs, the drifts settled heavy and still, and the wind lost its claws. When the first light bled across Miller's Creek, it revealed a town buried to the rooftops, fences vanished, streets erased. But it also revealed something else, the church still standing, its cross cutting through the snow like a promise. Inside, the basement stirred slowly back to life. Families uncurled from blankets. Children blinked into the pale glow seeping through cracks. For hours they had feared the storm would bury them alive. Now, morning told them they had outlasted it. Daniel sat slumped against a wall, Emily curled against his chest under 3 layers of blankets. Shadow lay across both of them like a sentinel, his head resting on Emily's shoulder. The dog hadn't closed his eyes all night, not once. Every sound, the crack of wood, the sigh of wind, had kept his ears twitching, his body ready. Only now, with daylight creeping in, did he finally let his lids droop. Emily stirred, blinking into the dim. She reached a tiny hand from the blankets and rested it against Shadow's fur. "He's warm," she murmured. Daniel smiled faintly. "Told you. Warmest thing in the storm." She tilted her face up to him. Her lips weren't blue anymore, just pale. Did the blizzard take everything?" Daniel glanced around the basement. Families clung to one another. Strangers shared food, whispered thanks. Outside, rooftops were gone, barns flattened, but inside these stone walls, life remained. Not everything, he said softly. He brushed her hair back from her forehead. It didn't take you. Shadow thumped his tail once against the stone, sealing the truth. The church doors creaked, spilling sudden brightness into the gloom. Volunteers in rescue coats stumbled in, snow still clinging to their shoulders. Their voices rang out like bells. We made it through. The roads are clearing. Evac teams are ready. Cheers broke across the basement. People wept, hugging, clapping strangers on the back. For the first time in 2 days, laughter cracked through the silence of fear. The commander spotted Daniel and hurried over. We've got sleds ready to ferry people to the high school gym. Warm generators, hot food, cots. We'll get the girl to medics immediately. Daniel nodded, exhausted but relieved. He adjusted Emily gently in his arms. She's tougher than she looks. But she needs real heat now. The commander's gaze shifted to Shadow. And the dog? Daniel smiled, pride breaking through his fatigue. He doesn't need rescuing. He's the reason anyone's alive. They moved in lines, people climbing out of the basement one by one, blinking into the brightness. The world above looked alien, snowdrifts taller than trucks, houses reduced to humps beneath the white. Yet in that stark landscape, the air was calm, clear, forgiving. Daniel carried Emily up the steps. Shadow bounded ahead, leaping into the snow, his paws sinking deep but steady. He turned, ears perked, waiting for them. Emily squinted into the daylight, her breath fogging against Daniel's chest. It's bright. Bright means alive, Daniel said. Shadow barked once, sharp, joyous. The sled team waited, dogs stamping, their breath steaming. Medics reached for Emily, but she clutched at Shadow's harness with surprising strength. Don't let Storm take me, she whispered again. Daniel crouched, guiding her hand to Shadow's fur. He won't. He'll be with you all the way. The shepherd pressed his head into her side, eyes steady, as if promising in a language older than words. Only when she loosened her grip did the medics lift her onto the sled, bundling her in furs and blankets. As the sled pulled away, Shadow bounded alongside until Daniel called him back. The shepherd stopped, chest heaving, snow coating his fur, but his gaze never left the child disappearing into the horizon. Daniel dropped a gloved hand to his back. You gave her back the world, boy. That's more than I've ever done in uniform. The commander approached, watching the sled vanish. You know, years from now, people won't remember the storm's name. They'll remember the soldier and his dog who found a whisper in it. Daniel didn't answer. He just scratched behind Shadow's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, tail swishing softly. Around them, the town began to stir, neighbors helping neighbors dig roofs free, volunteers hauling food from sleds, children chasing each other through snowdrifts as though the storm had never happened. Miller's Creek had been buried, but it had not been erased. Daniel stood a long time at the church steps, Shadow pressed against his leg, both of them watching the sky. The storm had taken barns, homes, fences, trees. But it had failed to take the one thing that mattered most, the will to protect, to endure, to whisper back against the howl of the wind, we're still here. Emily's mitten still hung from Daniel's belt, pink and torn, frost stiffening its edges. He touched it once, quietly, then looked down at Shadow. You're her shadow now, he said softly. And mine. The shepherd wagged his tail once in solemn agreement, eyes fixed on the horizon. And for the first time in days, Miller's Creek breathed freely.